Good, and to a story that will be relevant to our discussion this morning, Nairobians will begin paying to beat traffic jams on Waiyaki Way, Uhuru Highway and Mombasa Road beginning February next year, when the Chinese contractor developing the 27 kilometers toll road is expected to open the road for public use. Cabinet Secretary James Macharia of Transport will lead several cabinet secretaries in assessing the progress of the construction earlier this month, said the project would be completed by December this year, after which the contractor would commence testing it for 2 months. Macharia also defended the viability of the project and the financing model of the controversial 65 billion shillings project, which will see motorists pay between 100 shillings and 1,550 shillings depending on the size of the car and the distance traveled, in a dollar-based toll system that will cushion the Chinese operator from the exchange rate losses.
And it's a testament that we can have more BOT projects, get the private sector to do these projects, because we are limited and constrained in terms of our budgetary allocations. We are also constrained as how much we can borrow. We don't want to keep on borrowing more money. Initially, the project was to take 3 years, but we have told the contractor we want Kenyans to start using this route, because Kenyans take more than 2 hours from the Jomo Kenyatta Airport all the way to the city. And they have committed, they will complete this project by December this year.
Without infrastructure, the airport cannot survive for both transit and for domestic visitors. So infrastructure is key. This investment is key to the people to come in here, spend even 24 hours. So that is the innovation that will come in, to give short stay, 24-hour visa. Those are the new things.
All right. Welcome back to our discussion. Now, as we promised, you have a very interesting discussion this morning on the engineering behind the Nairobi Expressway, as well as the concerns around affordability, the environmental impact of the project, as well as universal access. And I think I have a very, very, very interesting panel that will help us break down this discussion. With me in studio this morning is Engineer Nathaniel Matalanga, the President of the Institution of Engineers in Kenya. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Victor.
We also have Engineer Peter Modernia, the Director General of the Kenya National Highways Authority, that is KENHA. He will be joining us in a bit. Joining us via Zoom, we have Stephen Mutoro, the Secretary General of the Consumers Federation of Kenya, COFEC, as well as Dr. Anne Kamau, a Research Fellow at the Institute for Development Studies, IDS, at the University of Nairobi. Gentlemen and lady, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Let me start with you, Nathaniel, even as we wait for Engineer to join us. This is a project that is pegged on engineering. And it costs a lot of money.
Yes.
But even before we get to the discussion, just briefly talk to us about the Institute of Engineers in Kenya, and perhaps touch on the few concerns that you had on this project in the initial stages.
Thank you very much, Victor. The Institution of Engineers of Kenya is a society that brings together all the engineers. It's a welfare society for all engineers in Kenya. We lobby for the government to enable a good working environment for all our members. We also organize events and functions to ensure that all our members are kept up to speed with the current technological development. We also work closely with the regulatory body, the Engineers Board of Kenya, to ensure that all the engineers that are offering the public service are properly regulated and registered, and they can easily be identified. So we in IEK, we work also closely with government to ensure that the government investment is protected. So for Nairobi Expressway, it's supposed to ease the movement of goods and also people. And there is a lot of traffic jams in Nairobi at the moment. So anything that can be done to ease this problem is welcome. Our initial concerns as engineers was that we were not, we did not take part in the conception of this project. We just heard when the president launched it, and we were concerned that we didn't know what was happening. So we raised these matters with the implementing agency, Kenya National Highways Authority, and they organized a session to brief us. There were also concerns about the budget That it's not very easy for us to understand or appreciate, because it is a lot of money that we as Kenyans are going to pay the public-private partner. And there is nothing we can do because the work has already started. Oh. We are also raising questions of it is being implemented at a very fast rate, which is good. Mm-hmm. But sometimes those who use the road know that you come in the morning and the road is clear. You come at night and you find an obstacle. Mm-hmm. So we are saying, who is supervising this road, and are they providing sufficient passage to the road users? That should be the norm. Okay. And as you have said, when the project is completed, what is going to be the rate for usage? Will the public afford this? Okay. Afford this price? There's also the concerns about the destruction of the environment, mm-hmm. Uprooting of trees, and are we going to plant others? Are we going to, at the end of the implementation of this project, are we going to retain the Nairobi green city mm-hmm. in the sun that we are supposed to have? And that is what attracts
quite a number of concerns right there, and we will be getting the engineer to answer some of those questions. But even, let me take you back to the point about involvement of engineers, because there's always been this concern that we have mega projects that consume a lot of taxpayers' money, and most of the time we seem to be giving the bigger pie to maybe foreign companies or foreign expertise importing, while we have local talent, by the which could deliver this high quality work within the time that is needed. How much of a concern is that to you as an institution?
Victor, that's a real concern to the Institution of Engineers of Kenya, because we need local participation. Participation by our engineers, because when a project like this is being implemented, we need to be able to grow the local capacity to do the next project. We need to grow the local capacity to maintain it. We don't have to always go to the foreigners. I think the challenges government has had is mainly to raise the capital investment, because when you go for the public-private partnership, the private partner is the person with the money who comes and wants to invest. But we also want the government to negotiate so that with that private partner, there is local involvement, because the Chinese private partner may be there probably being supported by his government, but now when we don't grow the local capacity, the time the private partner is not supported by his government, the price will go up and we shall have killed all the local capacity. What shall we do? We shall have to pay the high price. So we need to be sensitive to this idea that we have already a law that requires that there should be 40% local content. And whether it is a project in the private-public partnership or whether it's a project that is directly funded by the government, we need to put in place at the project conception stage to ensure that there is a minimum 40% local participation by the local engineers and also the local contractors, so that at the end of the day, Kenya can be proud to say that we have developed the capacity of our local partnership. Our local engineers are up to speed, because now we know we are now going towards celebrating the World Engineers Day on Thursday next week. And Kenya, we are part of the international community, being members of the East African Federation of Engineering Organizations, the members of the Federation of Africa Engineering Organizations. Our immediate past president of the Institution of Engineers of Kenya is now the current president of the East African Federation of Engineering Organizations, and is now invited to lead the East African countries in the celebration of the World Engineers Day. Okay. We in Kenya, we shall also be having a meeting at the Nairobi University to celebrate this day. And we are privileged in Kenya that I am a member of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. I'm a member of the executive committee, and I will be joining the rest of the international community to celebrate this day. So as in Kenya, we need the public to understand that when you embrace the technical input in these projects, there is then value for money. There is added value for money. We are able to check this foreign investor. Okay. That the negotiations and whatever we are getting into is fit for purpose, and it is value for the whatever investment, so that when we finally pay back this loan, we have gotten value for the Kenyans. Wanjiku is able to afford it, and then we are happy as a people.
Speaking about value for money, we have Dr. Ann Kamau joining us via Zoom. She's an expert in aspects of mobility. Dr. Ann, if you can hear me, Nathaniel has spoken about value for money, and from the onset of this project, 65 billion shillings, the cost has been a major concern for many people. Looking at the project, it's going to move, I think, 22,000 cars per day, but when you compare them with other models that we have, perhaps the mass transit system that should have been connecting Mombasa Road and Waiyaki Way, do you think we are getting value for money?
Thank you. Yes, the question in terms of value for money needs to be looked at from different perspectives. First, we are thinking about the expressway for who and for what. And then we need to ask the question, what is the priority for Kenya vis-a-vis other mobility options? For example, had we used the same money for mass transit, for moving masses? For example, had we invested in a tram? Had we invested heavily in BLT implementation compared to what we have as express highway? Would we get the same value for money? Which one would have given us better value for money? So for me, the question of whether it will move masses, whether it will move goods and people, that will move. But then also we ask, even in terms of affordability, given that for the 27 years, the company, the Chinese company is going, because it's a public-private partnership, they're going to recoup their money from the investment. So there will be toll stations along the way, and Kenyans and users will have to pay for it. First of all, in terms of visibility, will it be affordable for all? And is that really value for money? Again, in the end, for how long will it take for Kenya to benefit in the true sense from the project? It's a heavy investment. So for me, in terms of value for money, I would look at the issues of social justice and just ask, have we really explored all the better options that we could have used the money for, without saying necessarily that the government is wrong or that the investment is wrong, but what options were put on the table given the congestion situation in the country? And is the express highway really the best option for now for Kenya? And
let me bring in Engineer Modernia if he is ready to join us now. Engineer Peter Modernia, Dr. Ann has spoken about the options on the table and the amount of money that we're spending on this project. Given the 65 billion shillings that we had for this project and all the options on the table, do you feel that we picked the best option for us?
Thank you, Kiprop. What we can say is that the kind of money that we are spending there may appear to be a lot of money, but when it comes to the money that is wasted along that expressway, we are talking about 80,000 motorists that pass through that road every day. And if each one of them is actually losing 1 hour or more than 1 hour, you can see the loss that is actually experienced. So the road that we are doing, and as Anne has rightly said, the resources are coming from private sector. It would have meant that the government would have actually brought their own money, and if not, they would still have been able to get to development partners to get money to be able to do that. However, for now, we are getting these resources from the private sector, and we are allowing this private sector to learn that load for 27 years, so that then they can recoup. And what I can say is that on the same highway, we have the existing load remaining the way it is. And if it is going to remain the way it is, then it means anybody who can't afford to actually get to the expressway will actually have an option to use the road. I also want to mention, and I think I agree with Anne, that when we're thinking of urban transport, we have to think about mass movement, mass transport. And in that case, that is our line 1 of BRT. And beside now doing the expressway, we are also going to do a BRT line, and that is going to assist in moving the masses on that highway.
Engineer, let me hold you there because from the initial observations we saw experts talking about the implementation of the expressway would limit our ability to implement now the line 1 for BRT. What do you have to say about that?
No. It's a still on program, and we are going to do it because we still the vehicles that are going to actually be moved from the highway as it is today, it's only about 30%. So meaning 70% is still going to remain. And the only way to reduce those vehicles further is to actually bring in the BRT so that people can actually utilize the buses and leave the vehicles at home or leave vehicles at designated place, which we are going to make so that people can have a park and ride facility.
Okay. Let me bring in Stephen Mutoro from from COFEC. And Stephen, if you can hear me, we've spoken about the amount of people who actually use private cars in Nairobi, which is about 20%. A majority of people actually get to work by foot. I think about 40-something%, if I'm not wrong. The remaining percentage use matatus, while the rest of them then drive to work. Now, given this amount that we are putting into this project, 64 billion shillings, while a majority of Kenyans actually do not, will not use it because we come to work by foot, do you think the government is prioritizing on the public?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. The discussion that is going on is very, very important. In fact, I've been longing that we have this discussion before. So for NTV and I think IEK and the rest of your colleagues, that was a very good move. Now, if you hear what Engineer Matalanga talked about, you heard Anne talked about, it's actually the crux of the matter. And we've been, of course, the project is good. It will help some people, but the question is a priority for whom, for what, when, how. And all these issues boil down to a violation that was done. Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya talks about public participation. This project is, of course, procured under the PPPs of 2010, but the issue about the PPPs, that private does not include the word privacy. The public needed to know the detail from the concept, the design, the inconvenience, and there's also by the Article 27, sub-Article 8, about discrimination. You cannot come up with a solution that would then seem to serve just a section of the society, particularly if you're looking at them as the elite. I mean, you don't need a nuclear scientist to know that that project is serving particularly the elite and super elite, particularly who might not be, in my view, and I would say this with respect, who might not be locals and the kind of thing. Now, look at the casual manner in which the cabinet secretary gazetted the rates. For me, it's almost an abomination. You don't sit in your office. We don't have the local content in terms of our engineers. We don't know. By the way, the questions were being asked very nicely. Who's supervising? After 27 years, what happens? What will be the quality of the road? What is the cost of O&M? You know, Thika Superhighway, we've been spending quite a lot of money, and Engineer Mundinia will confirm, I mean, bear me witness, that we did what we did, but we're still spending. Now, the other crux of the matter is the taxation that Kenyans are paying on road maintenance levy. 18 shillings per every litre, you know, is used for this. So when we come to an extent where we're already paying tax, people come up with this kind of projects, and then we are told to pay even one more shilling. I think, for me, it raises fundamental legal questions that I think Kenyans should start opening their eyes and start asking very, very hard questions about PPPs and the road sector. I think I would really urge that Kenya and the Ministry of Roads and Transport really come up with the details, because I see this is going to be a very, very troubled project. Because one scenario I'll ask Kiprop would be very interesting. What if people don't use that road? Now, the inconvenience that people are going through on Mombasa Road at the moment, who's going to compensate? And lastly, Article 46(1)(a) of the Constitution, not even a statute of the Transport Act or whatever, or Kenya Act, says that the consumers have the right, absolute right, to have full information so that they can gain they can be, I mean, they have information for them to gain from the services or goods that are being provided. I can comfortably say very few Kenyans have information about this project. That's already a violation. And for me, there are so many legal and social issues that to save this project, because I see it's going to be really trouble, to save this project, I have a view that Kenya needs to come up and engage even beyond the engineers, because this is no longer an engineer's issue. The engineers may have been satisfied, but obviously the question that remains, what about the users? I mean, when do we determine the rates? Why 27 years? You know, so for me, there are a couple of questions that I'm sure nobody would easily answer, and we are watching very carefully because as consumers, we have a plan B.
Good. And from the consumer's point of view, Dr. Anne, let me come back to you. You heard what Mr. Mutora has talked about, and you had mentioned earlier, by the way, the issue about affordability. We are living in a city where already there's a divide between those who are well off and those who are struggling. When we have such projects, which sometimes could mean, you know, if you can afford it, you fly very quickly above us. But if you can't afford, you're stuck with the rest of us down here with the traffic jams. What does this mean with regards to widening the gap between, you know, the poor and the rich? Sorry,
I didn't get you very well in your last statement.
Yes, and I'm talking about the rates of charged by the tolls. Does this mean then, if you can't afford, you're going to be flying past the rest of us, while those of us who can't afford will be stuck in the traffic jams? What does this mean in widening the divide between the rich and the poor?
Yeah, I think the whole issue of affordability is one that needs to be carefully looked at in terms of, even if I afford today, will I afford the same amount tomorrow? Does that mean today I have a right of way and tomorrow I don't have a right of use? So I think the question of affordability, and I would also ask the question that has been raised, what if no one uses? What will happen to the concession? Will they get back their money? So I think we need to really know what is a priority. Who are the users of this road? And they really afford. If I am a school bus, for example, and I want to use Express Highway, will I get a waiver? If it is an ambulance, will we get a waiver? If I am on a wheelchair, and sometimes we know how they struggle on the road, I know there's a provision, there's going to be provision for the footpath, but again, who can afford to pay for this? And ordinary citizens who even sometimes complain about paying 100 shillings per day, will they afford to use it? So again, for me, it boils back to who are we, who is being served by this road, and is it really the priority? So that if you're saying that we are going to enhance mobility for users in the city and even those crossing the city, are really talking about the ordinary citizens whom actually most of them, like you rightly said, use public transport, and some of them even walk because they cannot afford public transport.
Good.
So I still do believe that we could probably have invested in a better option, like moves masses, either the trams or the metros. The BRT has been in planning for a very long time now, we would say. So why wouldn't we even first prioritize the BRT? Or why couldn't we even put an express lane for the BRT or the metros? So I think for me, the question of affordability with the current situation perhaps doesn't even rise, because it's simply, for me, not reachable for the majority of the citizens who in any case do not even own vehicles. So again, even the question of whether they'll afford or not does not arise, because they don't even own the vehicles. So it would only arise if they own the vehicles. But if they don't own the vehicles, then the question does not even come.
All right, let me bring in Engineer Peter Modernia here. Engineer, a lot of issues have been raised, of course, across the panel, from Nathaniel here to the two panelists joining us via Zoom. I mean, 100 shillings, between 100 shillings and 1,550 shillings is what you need to part with to use this road. You could correct me if I'm wrong on that. I mean, and for most people, they wonder, we have borders, we have taxis, which perhaps to move people from that distance, they will only be paid 200 shillings. And it begs the question, was this road only meant for the rich?
Thank you, Kipropo. I want to say this, that when you reduce the volume on the road itself, what it means is that everybody benefits, because if you are talking about a road which is congested, and you move part of that volume, then what it means is that you are going to allow now the other vehicles to pass in an easier way. So the fact that we are removing vehicles that are going on top of the load, then what we are saying is that we are allowing now the other vehicles to move in a faster way. And therefore, on that account, everybody benefits because now they are not going to use the 2 hours they use. They will use like 30 minutes to reach town. On the issue of affordability, there's a study that had been done way back in 2015, 2016. And we had seen that for a small vehicle, people were willing, because what we did was to ask 2 questions. Would people be willing to pay tolls? And they would answer yes, as long as it's going to bring efficiency. Then the question that followed was that, how much do you think would be reasonable to pay? And out of all the people that we asked, on average, we realized that people are willing to pay like 6 shillings per kilometer for a small vehicle. That translates to about 300 shillings. If we are to use the entire road from Mlolongo, the Uhuru Highway, all the way to Westlands, that would be about 300. Meaning that if you want to exit anywhere else, then you pay on the account of the road, of the distance you have covered. For example, in town, assuming it is half the distance, then you pay about 150 shillings. And as far as people are concerned, and I think I'm happy that you have put through that question of asking people, are people ready to pay for the expressway? I think people will say yes, but now we need to add and say, are they willing to pay 300 from one end to the other one? Are they willing to pay 100 to reach town? So that at least in terms of the affordability, then we can be able to be realistic. I want to say that we have a comprehensive design for that road. And we had done very good studies with World Bank, even before these people came. And what we are saying is that all that we had earmarked to do, which includes the BRT, which I mentioned earlier, which includes the walkways, which includes the interchanges, especially where there is a problem like City Cabanas, and also at Bakasi, all this is going to be sorted out. Because beside what the contractor is doing, as a government, we're also coming in later to actually ensure that the road is available and with all the facilities that we had planned.
Good. Engineer, let me hold you there before I bring in Nathaniel. There's a question of, we invested, I think, 32 billion shillings on Thika Road, and it was meant to solve traffic jams, the problem. Right now, if you look at Thika Road, the problem has just come back, because then the effect is, if you build such a road, development comes around it, and people, the number of people living within it are increased. And the general effect is then we are back to the same place where we were. So do you think it's time then we stopped prioritizing on users of private motor vehicles and actually invest in mass transit systems?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And that's the reason why we are planned for the mass rapid transit system. If you go and check even with the Kenya Railways, they have planned a very elaborate way of trying to move traffic or people within the city. So we are working together, all of us, with the Kenya Railways and ourselves. And that's why, whether we are talking of Thika Road, there's a BRT that is meant to actually be done on Thika Road. Today, we have a contractor who is actually on the ground trying to implement it so that then we can be able to achieve the best out of Thika Road.
Thank you. Let me bring in Nathaniel here. And you've had the issues raised by the panelists about, prioritizing on the public. Among the issues that you as engineers were raising prior to this project, were you able to perhaps push for, let's say, issues to do with walkways and footpaths and maybe cycling paths to ensure that it's an all-inclusive project? And even as you answer that, there's always been the question of whether our professionals are actually playing their role in developing this country in projects and things like Big Four.
Thank you, Kiprop. Engineering is an objective science. I mean, so specific that you can almost replay it. So we believe the studies were done at the concept when this project was conceptualized. And what we are asking as engineers is that, can this information be made known to the public so that the number of questions being raised, even the public can embrace it, if the studies and the information that the government has is positive. Because as Steve has said, there is no need to create an impression that there is information being withheld from the people this project is being developed for. It is supposed to be project for us Kenyans. And the reason why it is being being prioritized should also be known to us. So as engineers, as I said earlier, if the engineers of Kenya were involved in this project, and we are now 8,000 of us, we believe we have the critical mass to be involved in whatever the government is undertaking. This information will be available to the public. We would then be able to take on board whatever concerns the public is raising, and then we should have been brought on board before even signing the contract. But the challenge that we engineers are facing is that by the time we knew about the project, the contract already had been signed. And now when you are trying to negotiate, there is the issue of possible additional cost or possible termination of the contract. And then it becomes a challenge for all of us. The government should appreciate the participation of technical professionals in all the projects they are undertaking. The government should also put in senior leadership, and we are privileged to have Engineer Peter Modernia as the Director General of KENHA, because that's a technical position. We're also expecting that in that Ministry of Infrastructure, which is a whole engineering ministry, we should also have one of the principal secretaries as an engineer. At the moment, we don't have. And previously, it used to be an engineer who was the cabinet secretary for that ministry. Now we don't have. So we believe this information is there. The process is that probably we are not sensitive to the public and the users. And we are drifting away as a country to try to say the technical people are a roadblock. And therefore, the easiest thing is to do, put them aside. There is even, you go to parliament and you try to interfere with legislation that used to give space to a professional person.
I'm going to come back to that on whether you think then that being put aside is the reason why we see some of these projects failing the test.
It is a big, it is a big contributor to some of these challenges we are having. And when you go back to that, you realize that most of the chief officers in the counties who are heading technical positions, unfortunately, are not even technical people. They're not even engineers. And therefore, they don't know, they don't appreciate what they are trying to implement in that capacity.
Interesting. Thank you. And of course, as we informed you earlier, we're not alone in this discussion. We asked our viewers to join us in the discussion, to tweet us using the hashtag #NewNormal at NTV Kenya and at Victor Kiprop _. And I think we have some feedback regarding this. The question we asked was, as the Nairobi Expressway will be complete by the end of this year, do you think this was a necessary project? And are you ready to start paying to use it? And we have Kaba Goff, he says, why pay? Who said it was not enjoyable to be stuck in a traffic jam? Haraka Sinanga, very interesting. We have Mudemba Wanjiku, he says, I don't think it was even a necessary project. Paying to use a road in your own country takes us back to the colonial period. That money would have been used to feed those in need, repair the damaged roads, and so on. Okay. We have Fabian Miroro, he says, as long as we are going to pay directly for us to use it, then it is unnecessary. Why pay for a road in your own country? And then Wilfred Gathugu Kimodo says, it's necessary if Nairobi is to reduce traffic congestion. We have Monyoki Emmanuel who says, so the public participation comes months to completion? Kenya Jameni. And I think that closes the very comprehensive feedback that we've been receiving from you. And but again, talking about the concerns that that have been raised on this project, it's not just about affordability. We also had issues about environmental impact. Let me ask Anne to join us on this aspect. Anne, thousands and I think hundreds of trees were cut down on Mombasa Road, and even more are going to be cut for more projects that will be coming up. I've seen some of them, I think, on Kenyatta Avenue. How much of an environmental cost are we paying as we try to develop this country? And is there a way we can actually find a balance between the two? Anne?
Okay, I think in terms of losses, thank you. In terms of losses and environmental impact assessment, I've seen some of the reports that say that this was done, but there has been serious concern about the number of trees that have been cut along the corridor. We anticipate, of course, that there will be trees that will be planted, but my bigger concern is not just this road, it's just many of the roads in Kenya. we find, like we've seen over time, trees being planted on the various corridors. They cost a lot of money. A road project comes, those trees are cut down. Isn't there a way that the designs can be done without necessarily affecting the trees? Look at the Nakuru Highway. Previously, Nakuru, as you entered Nakuru, it was really beautiful. All the trees have been gone. You cannot exactly replace what was there before. So, and I've seen designs even from ITDP that show actually we could have avoided some of the trees that were cut. So is it even too late even now to see how we can, navigate this without necessarily cutting all the trees? The only trees that we managed to save is the Mugumo tree in Westlands that was also going down, but at least through public engagement and uproar, that tree was saved. But are there more trees that can be saved so that then we save the environment? And so for me, then we also need to ask the question of how long do we plan for infrastructure development projects? Do we plan short term so that this year as someone comes up, or even within 10 years and says we want to put up a road, and therefore then we have to remove everything that is on the road? Do we do any long-term planning? So I think for me it's the issue of, is there something that can be done to avoid it? I think if we engage professionals, if we engage ITDP, they'll give you very nice designs of how we could avoid cutting down these trees, and some of these trees, and we really can save the environment. Thank you.
On the bit about it's not too late for this, I think Mr. Motoro would agree with you. Stephen, I think the project is nearing completion in some 10 months, but it's not too late. First, of course, to address some of the concerns you have on the project, and also in terms of future projects, making sure that they are all inclusive for the rest of the public. What is your message to the government going forward?
I agree. Of course, I'm not a statistician, but you've seen the feedback that I just come a while ago from your viewers, and you could conclude that over 95% are raising questions, or almost the same question. So for me, it's never late. I think we just need a confession from government that they didn't do it right. And I can tell you even one more serious issue. When the engineers, IEK are being very diplomatic with the truth here. Because when you say the local content is not done, we are inviting a foreign firm. They are bringing the materials. For me, the serious question is actually about even the quality of the materials, the strength of those steels and all those kind of issues. So to answer your question, yes, it's never late for anything. Make a confession. Like one of your viewers was saying, we are going to do things, probably we are going to climb a tree from the top. So public participation will come at the end, but we need certain confessions, one on environment, because it's not just about trees. We don't know what's happening on all those things happening. I mean, steel and all those. We don't know what's radioactive and what is not. We don't know about pollution of the dust and all that. So what we need is the leadership of the ministry, and Kenya to come out and make certain confessions so that we can look at what is a win-win, even as it is now. But I see this as a project that's likely to remain in court for so long. One, because when they talk about, for example, ambulances are going to be free, they're assuming that the sick people are the only ones in ambulances. There are sick people who are on motorcycles or whatever vehicles and what have you ordinary. So for me, there will be need for a discussion, very honest, brokered by probably an independent institution like the professionals, just to address the issues that we are raising. Secondly, I think it's important to possibly ask that such a discussion will only happen if the minister and a good friend of mine, Mr. Macharia, would actually revoke that Gazette notice purporting, to give the figures that obviously him and others can afford. Then number three, I think we need a deliberate mechanism so that we avoid these mega projects. Because like Honorable Dwale would tell you publicly in Parliament, most of these mega projects are not meant for public interest. They're about 10% to help certain people, out of it. But eventually, they're actually white elephants. Mombasa Road itself, there could be about 7 or so footbridges that are never used by the public because nobody was consulted and that kind of thing. So my view is it's time we start a discussion and say on the road sector, let's focus on the mass transit. Let's talk about people who don't even have vehicles. Let's talk about how we can decongest our roads with people using PSVs, you know, the passenger service vehicles.
All right.
Let's not talk about people with personal vehicles or private vehicles, because that is where we lose it, and we do it for selfish interest, not for public interest. And I think for me, that's where the crux of the matter is. But yes, it's never late. We can open that discussion.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, and I want to invite your final remarks from all the panelists. I'll start with you, Nathaniel. You've had all the issues that have been raised from the issues about involvement of Kenyan professionals. In your final remarks in 30 seconds, how do we move this forward to ensure that we get a desirable outcome?
Thank you very much, Kiprop. I think it is very easy, and as requested by Steve Mutoro, we think we are up to the task. We can lead the discussions to try to understand the project and bring it into the public domain. One of the ways of making sure that there is local participation is to try to steer away from the mega projects because of the capacity of our local contractors. We can break many of these projects into smaller lots so that the local people can bid and they can carry out the work. The design is not an issue because, as I said, we are now 9,000 engineers in Kenya, and if given a chance, we can do the design work and lead the processes. It is not very complicated because it's not the first time it is being done in the world, and nowadays we live in a global community, so you can always get this information. Right. So it is not late, as we said, and we are just asking that the government should give engineers a chance to get involved and ensure that at the end of the day we are all saying thank you very much. There is value for money in these investments, and it is there, can serve us for 50 years. Okay. Thank you.
Engineer Modernia, the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco, the Xiongjion in Seoul, and others are some of the projects and elevated highways that have had to be pulled down after they were found not to have very important socio-economic importance to the cities. And so to avoid such situations in the future, in your closing remarks, what is the way forward?
Thank you, Kiprop, and thank you for this chance that you have given us to be able to actually engage with the public. First of all, I want to actually say that all the materials that are actually being utilized for that expressway are coming from Kenya. Be it cement, we are consuming over 9,000 bags of cement every day from our local factories. We are consuming several tons of steel from our own factories. The only steel that is coming from outside is what we call high tensile steel, and it's hardly 10% of the steel that we are using. So, in terms of the way this project is actually spurring the economic growth in terms of the fact that we are using local material is actually high. And consider that even when it comes, we talk of sand, what we talk of the transportation, all this is actually being hired from the local environment. When you talk of environment, there were trees that were on the right of way, and they had to move. But that doesn't mean that we are not coming back to actually ensure that we plant more trees. I want to tell you, come next year when the road is going to be opened, we are going to have the trees, and I want to actually even call the press so that we can go to where even these trees are being prepared in the airport, right, so that then you can be able to see that we are working towards making sure that we are not even going to have to replace the ones that we had, but we're even going to put more. Okay. I want to say this finally, that we are coming up, we have a comprehensive solution for that road. And I mentioned that be it BRT is going to be available, be it walkways, they are going to be available, and therefore the road is going to be efficient and everybody is going to benefit out of it.
Thank you, Engineer. Thank you. Of course, we'll hold you to account to some of the promises you have made. Mr. Mutoro, in 30 seconds in your final remarks, how do we put the public at the center of every other infrastructure project in the future?
I think, for me, first of all, we need to have these conversations, excuse me, but more fundamentally, we need to begin by respecting Article 35 of the Constitution. We need the publication of that contract, the PPP, with the person doing this project. And of course, just comply with the law, because we are willing to cooperate, but let's begin with the basics. Let's respect the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Mutoro from COFEC. And finally, Anne, you are the expert in this. From an expert's point of view, we are never, ever going to, of course, have a permanent solution for some of these things. Is there a way we can actually find, what's the sustainable way to move this thing forward? In your closing remarks, briefly.
Yeah, thank you. I agree it is important to involve the experts, but the experts multidisciplinary. It's not just the engineers. We have the social scientists. I am a social scientist myself. We have urban planners. We even have anthropologists who would want to save as many traditional trees as there are in the country. So we need to think about different professionals and how there are forums we can come and come together and debate and we discuss, we deliberate on all of this. And they have been there, but I think they've not been enough. We need to understand how do you reach out the general public. This is their role. It is not engineers, it's not the professionals' role. It is the ordinary citizen who has to get off the bridge and go down and worry about safety issues.
All right.
So, and for me, in terms of parting shot, I would say, let us engage all professionals, let us engage citizens, let's get a few representatives of the users and engage with them to really understand what it is that we are doing so that they don't just see mega roads in our country that they don't understand. Finally, I think we need to look at both the short-term and the long-term implications. At the moment, if you look at what is happening on the express highway, there's provision for road use, the motorists. There's no provision for pedestrians. There's no provision for motorcyclists. So what is happening? The motorcyclists have moved up the bridge and occupied the space. So what happened to the pedestrians?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, gentlemen and lady, for your valuable contribution. Mr. Nathaniel Matalanga, the President of the Institution of Engineers in Kenya. Engineer Peter Mundinia, the Director General of the Kenya National Highways Authority, KENHA. Mr. Stephen Mutoro, the Secretary General of the Consumers Federation of Kenya, COFEC. Dr. Anne Kamau, a Research Fellow at the Institute for Development Studies, IDS, at the University of Nairobi. Clearly, this discussion has to continue. We urge you to continue tweeting us at NTV Kenya at @VictorKiprop_ on Twitter. Use the hashtag #NewNormal. We have to end this discussion here, but the show doesn't end. On the other part of this break, we will be telling you why you need to have a certified engineer for every project you undertake and just how exactly you can identify one. Don't go anywhere.